My name is David, and I am 42 years old. And right now, I feel as if my entire life is crumbling beneath my feet. I never imagined that the woman I once promised to love and protect would one day look me in the eye and threaten to rip away the two people I love more than anything else in this world, our children. But before it came to that, there were years of smaller fractures, cracks in the foundation of our marriage that grew wider and deeper until the whole house felt ready to collapse. When I first met Laura, I thought she was everything I had ever wanted. She was smart, beautiful, and carried herself with a kind of confidence that drew people in. I fell in love quickly and thought I had won the lottery when she agreed to marry me. For years, things were good. We had our disagreements like any couple, but nothing that ever felt insurmountable. Then life started to shift. The weight of mortgages, bills, and raising children slowly pressed down on us. I worked long hours at my job in construction management, often leaving before sunrise and coming home after dark, just to make sure we could afford the house we both insisted was perfect for our growing family. That house was more than brick and wood to me. It was the place I wanted my kids to grow up in, the place that held all their first steps, their birthday parties, the scuffed walls from when they ran through the hallways laughing. To me, it was our home. To Laura, as I would learn later, it was leverage. I remember the first big fight we had about the house. The mortgage had gone up after some property tax changes, and I was frustrated. I told her we needed to cut back on expenses. She looked at me coldly and said, "Maybe if you actually aimed higher in your career, we wouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck." That cut deep. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't ambitious. I was killing myself out there, working overtime, sacrificing weekends, trying to give her and the kids stability. But nothing I did ever seemed to be enough. She started comparing me to her friends' husbands, men who worked in finance or law, men who wore suits every day instead of steel-toed boots. It felt like she saw me as less of a man because I worked with my hands. Over the years, resentment built between us. She grew distant. I noticed she spent more time scrolling on her phone than talking to me. Some nights, she wouldn't even sit down for dinner, claiming she had errands or things to do with her friends. The intimacy we once had disappeared completely. What remained were constant arguments, usually about money. She wanted new furniture, vacations, things we simply could not afford. And when I said no, she acted as though I was depriving her of some life she deserved. I tried to ignore the warning signs, telling myself every marriage has rough patches, but things escalated when she started hinting that the house should be in her name. At first, it was subtle, jokes about how I could just sign it over to her since she handled the kids and the home more than I did. But the more I brushed it off, the more serious her tone became. I told her straight up, the house belongs to both of us. That's how it's staying. That conversation ended with her slamming the bedroom door in my face. The breaking point came one night after another long day at work. I walked in to find her sitting at the kitchen table, arms crossed, eyes cold. The kids were upstairs, probably doing homework. She didn't waste time with small talk. "David," she said flatly, "I want the house in my name. Entirely. If you don't agree, I'll make sure you never see the kids again." I thought I misheard her. My ears rang. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You heard me," she snapped. "I'm done living like this, tied to you and your stubborn pride. Either sign over the house, or I'll take the kids and fight for full custody. And trust me, I'll win." It felt like someone had punched me straight in the gut. The woman I once believed would stand beside me through anything was threatening to tear my family apart unless I handed her the very thing I had sacrificed so much to keep. My mind flashed through every memory in that house, painting the nursery with my own hands, fixing the leaky roof in the middle of the storm, carrying my son up the stairs when he was sick, teaching my daughter how to ride her bike on the driveway. All of that, every ounce of sweat and love I'd poured into this home, she wanted to snatch away as though it were a bargaining chip that I could barely breathe. My heart was pounding, my palms were slick with sweat, and yet some strange part of me stayed calm enough to whisper, "You can't be serious." Her response was ice. "I'm dead serious. Think about it. Who do you think the court will side with? A mother who's been there every day, or a father who's always working late? You know the answer." I barely slept that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of my children breathing in their rooms, and I realized how much power she thought she had over me. She believed she could use the kids as weapons, as pawns in some twisted negotiation. That thought made me sick. My children weren't bargaining chips. They were my life. The next morning, I drove to work in a fog, every red light and honking horn barely registering. All I could hear was her voice repeating the threat. Part of me wanted to cave, to give her whatever she wanted just to keep the kids close. But another part of me, stronger, more defiant, knew that if I surrendered now, I would lose everything. Not just the house, but my dignity, my role as a father, the respect my children deserve to see in me. If I let her bully me into this, what would stop her from demanding more later? That day, as I hammered nails into wooden beams and gave orders to the crew, my mind was far away. I thought about the life I wanted for my kids. I thought about the kind of man I wanted them to see when they looked at me. And I made a decision. No matter how painful this fight became, I was not going to be blackmailed into giving up the home I had built for them. That night, when I came home, she was waiting for me again, her expression expectant, like she thought I'd already given in. I looked her in the eye and said, "No, I won't do it." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Her face twisted into something I had never seen before, a mixture of rage and contempt. She hissed, "Then you're going to regret this." And with that, she stormed off, leaving me standing in the kitchen with my hands trembling, knowing in my bones that a war had just begun. The morning after I told Laura no, I woke up with this heavy knot in my stomach. I knew she meant what she said. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't the kind of person to throw out empty threats just to scare me. She was prepared to go all the way. For years, I had brushed off her anger as emotional outbursts, but this time I could see it in her eyes. She had already started planning her next move. Tea, breakfast. She didn't speak a word to me. She poured cereal for the kids, kissed them on the head, and completely ignored my presence, as though I were a ghost haunting my own kitchen. The kids felt the tension too. My daughter, who was only 9, asked, "Why are you and Mommy mad?" I froze. I forced a smile and said, "We're just having a disagreement, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But inside, I was crumbling. How was I supposed to shield them from this storm that was about to rip through their lives? Later that week, Laura stopped wearing her wedding ring. It was a small thing, but it felt like a slap in the face every time I noticed her bare finger. She started making phone calls in the other room, lowering her voice when I walked by. Papers appeared on the dining table, brochures about lawyers, custody laws, and divorce consultations. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. One night, when I confronted her, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I've already spoken to an attorney. If you don't want this to get ugly, sign the house over and we can keep things simple. Otherwise, I'll take everything I can." Her words cut into me like a blade. "Take everything," I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. "This isn't a business deal, Laura. These are our children, our lives." She shrugged, cold and calm. "That's your problem. I'm done sacrificing. I want security, and if you won't give it to me, I'll get it through the court." That night, I sat in my car for nearly an hour before coming inside. I was too angry, too broken to face anyone. I stared at the steering wheel and thought about every man I had ever known who went through divorce. Almost all of them lost the house. Most of them saw their kids every other weekend, if they were lucky. I thought about my father, who after his own divorce, lived in a tiny rented apartment and drank himself to sleep every night because he missed us so much. I swore to myself that I wouldn't let history repeat itself. The next day, I called my friend Mark. He had gone through a nasty custody battle a few years earlier, and if anyone could give me advice, it was him. He didn't sugarcoat anything. "David, listen to me," he said. "Courts usually lean toward the mother, but that doesn't mean you're powerless. You need a lawyer, and you need one now. Do not wait for her to file first. If she wants war, you need to be ready." His words scared me, but they also lit a fire inside me. I started researching family lawyers in the area. I made appointments, I explained my situation, and each time I said the words out loud, "My wife is threatening to take my kids unless I give her the house," it sounded more and more surreal, like something ripped from a nightmare. Yet it was my reality. Money became another point of stress. Legal fees weren't cheap, and while I had savings, they were meant for emergencies, not this kind of battle. Still, I knew this was an emergency. Losing my children, losing my home, what could be more urgent than that? I hired an attorney named Richard, a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 50s who had seen cases like mine before. He didn't make promises, but he gave me a plan. Do not engage with her threats, he advised. Do not sign anything. Keep records of everything she says or does. And most importantly, stay calm around your children. The court will notice who is the stable parent. Easier said than done, because inside I was boiling. Every time I looked at Laura, I saw a stranger, someone capable of destroying everything we had built together. And yet, when I tucked my kids into bed at night, when my son hugged me and whispered, "Good night, Dad," I knew I had no choice but to fight with everything I had. Things escalated quickly. One afternoon, I came home from work and found Laura packing bags. My heart dropped into my stomach. "What are you doing?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. She didn't even look at me. "Taking the kids to my mother's for the weekend." Without telling me, I snapped. She finally met my gaze, her expression smug. "I don't need your permission. You'll see them when I decide you can." I wanted to scream, to grab those bags and throw them down, but Richard's voice echoed in my head. "Stay calm. Document everything." So I clenched my fists, bit my tongue, and watched as she walked out the door with our children. The sound of that door closing behind them was the loneliest sound I had ever heard. I sat on the couch in silence for hours, the house feeling colder and emptier than ever. I wondered what she was telling them, what lies she was planting in their heads. Was she painting me as the villain already? Was she telling them Daddy didn't care enough, that Daddy couldn't provide? The thought tore me apart. When they came back 2 days later, the kids were quiet, distant. My daughter wouldn't look me in the eye. My son clung to Laura's side. That was the moment I knew she was already trying to turn them against me. That night, I broke down. I locked myself in the bathroom, sat on the floor, and cried like I hadn't cried in years. The kind of deep, heaving sobs that shake your whole body. I wasn't just crying for myself. I was crying for my children, for the life we had before everything turned toxic, for the fear that I might lose them. But when I finally pulled myself together, I made a vow. She could threaten me. She could manipulate. She could try to poison my children's minds against me, but I would not break. I would not hand her the house, and I would not walk away from my kids. If she wanted a war, then she had one dot, and deep down, I knew the battle was only just beginning. The day the official court papers arrived, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I came home from work, exhausted and covered in dust, only to find a thick envelope sitting on the kitchen counter with my name printed in bold. Laura must have left it there intentionally, almost like a trophy. My hands shook as I tore it open, and with each line I read, my chest grew tighter. Custody petition. Motion for full legal and physical custody of our children, claiming I was unfit to provide them with the stability they needed. Attached to it was a demand that the marital house be awarded solely to her as part of the settlement. I sat at the table staring at those words, numb, unfit, as if the countless nights I stayed awake rocking our son when he was sick, the weekends I sacrificed fixing up the house so it would be safe and warm, the overtime hours I worked just to keep food on the table. All of that meant nothing. She had painted me as some absentee father, a man who chose work over family. She twisted the truth into a weapon and handed it to the court like ammunition. When I called Richard, my lawyer, I could barely form sentences. My throat was tight, my voice breaking. He listened patiently, then said in that steady, deliberate tone of his, "David, this is exactly why we prepared. Do not panic. We'll respond. We'll fight back. But you need to hold yourself together." Holding myself together was easier said than done. Every moment with my kids felt like it might be the last before a judge decided to take them away from me. When I tucked my daughter into bed that night, she asked quietly, "Daddy, are you going to leave us?" My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I hugged her tight and whispered, "Never. No matter what happens, I will always be here for you." But even as I said it, a part of me feared it might not be true. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings with Richard, and sleepless nights. I had to gather every piece of evidence that proved I was a devoted father. School drop-offs, medical appointments I attended, bills I paid, even photos of us together. Richard told me, the more you can show you've been present, the better your case. So I became my own investigator, combing through years of receipts and calendars, building a timeline of my life as a father. Meanwhile, Laura played her part to perfection. At school events, she acted the doting mother, smiling sweetly while ignoring me entirely. She started telling neighbors that I was never home, that I cared more about money than my children. Word traveled fast in our small community, and I began to notice the looks people gave me. Pity from some, suspicion from others. It was as if she had already declared me guilty before the trial even began. The stress started to eat me alive. My body ached constantly, my appetite vanished, and I found myself staring at the ceiling night after night, the clock ticking past 2, then 3, then 4 in the morning. Some nights I would get out of bed, walk quietly into my kids' rooms, and just watch them sleep, memorizing the sound of their breathing as though I might lose it forever. One particularly bad night, I broke down in front of Richard during a late meeting. What if she wins? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What if I lose them? He leaned forward, his eyes firm. David, listen to me. You are a good father. Judges don't always strip custody away from fathers anymore. Not if there's proof you've been involved. But you have to stay calm, collected. If you lose your temper in court, if you look unstable, she'll use that against you. Keep your head. Your kids need you strong. That advice became my mantra, though it was hard to live by. Because every time Laura and I crossed paths, my anger boiled over. She seemed almost gleeful, as if watching me suffer gave her satisfaction. One evening, after a tense exchange about the kids' schedules, she leaned in close and whispered, "You're going to lose, David. They'll see who the real parent is, and it's not you." I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her understand the damage she was doing. But I swallowed the rage, clenched my jaw, and walked away. Because Richard was right. One wrong move, and she would twist it against me as the court date drew closer. The pressure intensified. My mother called me off, and her voice heavy with worry. "Don't let her take those children, David," she begged. "You've worked too hard for this family." Friends offered support, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Most of them had seen custody battles before, and they knew how easily the system could turn against fathers. One weekend, when the kids were with me, I took them to the park. We played soccer, laughed, and for a few blissful hours, I felt like things were normal again. But as I watched them run across the field, I couldn't shake the fear that these moments might soon be rationed out to me. Every other weekend, supervised, conditional. The thought made my chest ache. Back home, as I tucked them into bed, I whispered a silent promise. I will not give up on you. I will fight until my last breath if I have to. But beneath that vow was a gnawing fear I couldn't silence. What if my best wasn't enough? What if the system saw me the way Laura wanted them to see me? What if, despite all my love, I walked out of that courtroom empty-handed? As the first hearing approached, I could feel the weight of the war pressing down on me. I wasn't just fighting for House anymore. I was fighting for my children, for my identity as a father, for the very life I had built from the ground up. And for the first time in my life, I realized that no amount of hard work or sacrifice could guarantee victory. All I could do was stand my ground and pray it was enough. The morning of the first court hearing, I woke up before dawn, my stomach in knots and my hands trembling. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee, unable to take a sip, rehearsing in my head every possible question I might be asked, every possible accusation Laura's attorney might throw at me. I put on my best suit when I had only worn a handful of times, and as I knotted the tie in front of the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back at me. He looked worn down, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights, his jaw clenched tight with fear and determination. When I arrived at the courthouse, Laura was already there. She wore a carefully chosen outfit, conservative and polished, with her hair pulled back neatly. She looked every bit the picture of a devoted mother. Standing next to her was her attorney, a slick man in an expensive suit who gave me a smug nod as if he already knew the outcome. Laura avoided looking at me, but I could feel the satisfaction radiating off her. To her, this wasn't just about custody or property. It was about winning. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. The judge, a woman in her late 50s, sat at the bench, her expression unreadable. My lawyer, Richard, leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. Let me do the talking unless they address you directly. Remember, appearances matter here." I nodded, gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles turned white. Laura's lawyer started with his opening statement, painting her as the selfless mother who had sacrificed everything for her children, while I was portrayed as the absent, work-obsessed father who barely contributed beyond a paycheck. He emphasized how she had been the one attending school events, scheduling doctor appointments, nurturing the children's day-to-day lives, while I was too busy with work. His voice dripped with false sympathy as he described her fears of financial instability and how she desperately needed the security of the home to raise the children properly. Each word felt like a dagger, twisting deeper into my chest. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, to scream that none of it was true, but I forced myself to sit silently, my fists clenched under the table. Then it was Richard's turn. His voice was calm but firm as he laid out my contributions. The long hours I worked not out of selfishness, but out of sacrifice. The home I had built and maintained with my own hands. The countless times I had been there for my kids in ways that couldn't be captured on a calendar. He reminded the court that being a good parent wasn't about who appeared at the most school events, but about who provided stability, safety, and unconditional love. When the time came for testimony, Laura spoke first. She cried on the stand, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as she described the loneliness she felt in our marriage, the fear of financial ruin, the nights she spent alone with the children while I was at work. She painted me as a stranger in my own home, a man who valued money more than family. I sat there, stunned, watching the woman I once loved twist our history into a performance. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every sniffle, every pause for dramatic effect was calculated. Then it was my turn. As I walked to the stand, my legs felt heavy, my heart racing so loudly I thought the whole room could hear it. I took a deep breath and began. I spoke from my heart, not from a script. I talked about working long hours because I wanted my family to have more than I ever had growing up. I described teaching my daughter how to ride her bike, staying up all night when my son had a fever, fixing every broken pipe and leaky roof in that house so it would be safe for them. I admitted that I wasn't perfect, that I had missed some school plays and dinners, but I never stopped being present as a father. At T1 point, I looked directly at the judge and said, "Your Honor, the house isn't just a building to me. It's the home where my children have grown up, where every memory of their childhood lives. I cannot give it away as if it were a bargaining chip. And I cannot accept the idea that the love and sacrifices I've made for my children are somehow less important because I spent my days working to support them. I am their father, and I will fight for them with everything I have." My voice cracked at the end, and I saw Laura smirk faintly as if she thought my emotion was weakness. But I also noticed the judge watching me intently, her eyes softer than before. The hearing dragged on for hours, with accusations flying back and forth. At one point, Laura's attorney presented text messages where I had written things in anger, short, frustrated words during late-night fights. "See," he argued, "this is a man prone to aggression, someone who cannot control his temper." I wanted to explode, but Richard quickly interjected, explaining the context, reminding the court that heated words and private arguments did not define my ability as a father. Still, the humiliation of having my personal life dissected in public was almost unbearable. By the end of the day, I was emotionally drained. The judge didn't make a ruling that afternoon, instead scheduling another session for the following month. As we left the courtroom, Laura walked past me, her eyes cold and triumphant. She whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "You're losing, David. You can feel it, can't you?" Her words burned through me like acid. That night, I sat in my empty living room, the silence deafening, and for the first time, I truly wondered if I had the strength to keep going. The fight was destroying me piece by piece, and yet I knew quitting wasn't an option. In the weeks that followed, I tried to hold myself together for the kids. On the outside, I forced smiles, cracked jokes, pretended everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling. Every knock on the door made my chest tighten. Every phone call from Richard filled me with dread. The war wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. It was inside my mind, eating away at me. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat on the back porch and stared at the house. I thought about all the blood and sweat I had poured into it, every nail hammered, every wall painted. And I thought about Laura's words, about her threat to take it all away. A part of me felt broken beyond repair. But another part of me, the part that had carried me this far, rose up in defiance that I whispered into the night. You will not take this from me. Not the house, not my children, not who I am. And as the next court date approached, I knew that no matter how much it tore me apart, I had to keep standing my ground. Because giving in meant losing everything. The weeks leading up to the final court date felt like living on the edge of a cliff, never knowing when the ground would give way. Every day, I woke up with my chest heavy, my thoughts consumed by the trial, by Laura's threats, by the possibility of losing my children. I tried to keep life normal for them, but it was impossible to hide the tension. My daughter grew quieter. My son clung to Laura more than before. I could feel her poisoning their minds, drip by drip, and it broke me in ways I can't even fully explain. When the morning of the final hearing came, I barely touched my breakfast. My mother called, reminded me to stay strong. You're their father, she said firmly. Don't let her make you forget that. I clung to those words as I drove to the courthouse, my palms slick on the steering wheel. The courtroom was the same, cold and sterile, but this time the weight of it felt unbearable. Laura sat across from me, perfectly composed, her attorney at her side. I noticed she wore the same necklace I had given her on our 10th anniversary, and for a brief moment, I was hit with a wave of memories. Our wedding, our first apartment, the night we brought our daughter home from the hospital. But those memories felt like ghosts now, shadows of a life that no longer existed. The proceedings began, and Laura's attorney once again painted me as the absentee father, the man who chose work over family, the man who couldn't provide the emotional stability the children needed. He argued that the house should belong entirely to Laura, so the children would not face uprooting in the event of divorce. His words were slick, rehearsed, designed to tug at the judge's sympathies. Then Richard rose. His voice was steady, strong, almost commanding. He reminded the court of every contribution I had made, every sacrifice, every piece of evidence that showed I was not only present, but deeply invested in my children's lives. He emphasized that Laura's demands were not about the well-being of the children, but about control, about punishing me for refusing to surrender. And then he said something that made my chest tighten with both fear and pride. Your Honor, this case is not about a house. It's about a father who refuses to be bullied into giving away the foundation of his children's lives. It is about whether love and sacrifice are worth less, because they don't come neatly packaged in appearances. Finally, it was time for closing statements, and I was allowed to speak. I stood, my legs trembling, and faced the judge. I didn't read from notes, I didn't rehearse. I spoke from the rawest place in my heart. Your Honor, I began, my voice shaky but growing stronger with every word. I may not have been the perfect husband, and I know I've made mistakes. But I have never stopped being a father. Every hour I spent at work, I spent for my family, for my children. The house Laura wants to take is not just wood and brick. It's where my daughter learned to walk, when my son spoke his first words, where their childhood lives in every corner. She asked me to give it up or risk losing my children, but I cannot, because that would mean surrendering the life I've fought so hard to give them. I will never stop fighting for them, even if it costs me everything else. When I sat down, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. The judge studied me for what felt like an eternity before announcing she would deliver her decision later that afternoon. Those hours waiting were torture. I paced outside the courthouse, my heart pounding, my mind replaying every word, every look, every accusation. When the bailiff finally called us back in, I felt like I was walking into the final moments of a battle that had already drained every ounce of strength from me. The judge's voice was calm, deliberate, but each word landed like a hammer. She acknowledged that both parents clearly love their children, but she also noted the manipulative nature of Laura's demands and the threats she had used to force a settlement. She said such behavior did not reflect the best interest of the children. She ruled for joint custody, giving me equal rights and time with my kids. As for the house, she stated plainly that it would remain marital property until the divorce was finalized, and any division would be based on fairness, not coercion. I felt the air rush back into my lungs as if I'd been holding my breath for weeks. Relief washed over me, not because I had won, but because I had not lost the two people who mattered more than anything. I turned to look at Laura. Her face was pale, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with fury. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her confidence. When we walked out of the courtroom, she brushed past me without a word, but I didn't care. I had stood my ground. I had refused to give in to her threats. And in the end, the truth had been enough. That night, when the kids came home, I sat with them in the living room, holding them close, feeling their small arms around me. My daughter whispered, "Daddy, are we staying here?" I kissed her forehead and said, "Yes, sweetheart, you're staying right here." My son smiled for the first time in weeks. And in that moment, I knew every sleepless night, every ounce of pain, every tear had been worth it. The battle wasn't over. Divorce is never simple, and there would be more arguments, more papers, more scars. But I had survived the worst of it. I had faced the storm head-on and refused to let it take me down. And as I sat in a house I had fought so hard to protect, with my children safe beside me, I realized something important. Laura had tried to use fear to break me, but instead, she had taught me just how strong I really was. I may have lost a wife, but I had not lost myself. And I had not lost my children that in the end, that was all that mattered.